Welcome, everyone. We'll give people a couple more minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Welcome again. So let's get started. Thank you for joining today's webinar on discovering changes to the new EnterpriseOne Orchestrator provided by ACBM Solutions. My name is Catherine Geyer, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Before we get started, let's do a few housekeeping items. First, participants will be in listen-only mode. The presentation is going to take about 50 minutes, and then there'll be 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Participants can submit questions in a panel like the one displayed on the right side of your screen by clicking on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen. The chat and raise hand functions should not be used. So let me take a couple of minutes to talk about who we are and what we do. ACBM Solutions is headquartered in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. We are an Oracle Gold Partner, and we are one of only 2 companies that has an Oracle validated integration with the EnterpriseOne Orchestrator. While we do offer traditional consulting services like implementations, upgrades, custom development, and report writing, ACBM Solutions is hyper-focused on the Orchestrator across our 3 main lines of business. First, we offer Orchestrator training in both public and private classes. These can be delivered in person or via our virtual classroom. Application integration and business process automation are also consulting services we offer. Our third line of business is off-the-shelf IoT solutions and products. Our Oracle validated integration was awarded for our fleet management platform and services. So with that, let's go to the agenda. Our main presenter for today's webinar is Larry Fiorino. Larry is one of the co-founders of ACBM Solutions. Larry has been a J.D. Edwards consultant for over 14 years and has been working with the Orchestrator since its inception. Larry will be covering the following agenda topics: why the Orchestrator, types of orchestrations, the evolution of the Orchestrator over the last few years, our participation in the beta program. The majority of today's presentation will be focused on the 10 biggest changes to the new Orchestrator, as well as a demonstration of the new Orchestrator Studio. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Larry.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So before we get into the biggest changes of the new Orchestrator Studio, just for anyone, I think most of you are probably already familiar with the Orchestrator, but for those of you who aren't, I want to just take 2 minutes and give a very high-level overview of why the Orchestrator is important and what we can do with it. So why the Orchestrator? It really starts with 3 main characteristics. The first one is data availability, and the data availability speaks to the real-time nature in which we can get data from some source and process it into J.D. Edwards. The second one is data quality. So when we're getting data directly from the source and we're removing the manual manipulation of data in the middle before it gets to J.D. Edwards, it makes the data quality that much better. Now at this point you may say there are a lot of tools that can provide real-time integrations and get data directly from the source, and I would absolutely agree with you. But the thing that separates the Orchestrator from these other solutions is this third piece, the data integrity. The way the Orchestrator works is it's done at the application level. So there's no integration at tables and fields or any of the other intermediate levels such as business functions. Everything is done at the application level just as a user would if they were entering data or making changes through the screen. This means that if we're filling out an application, a form in JD Edwards, and JD would fill out all these other fields for us as a user, then the orchestrator will fill that out for us as well, because again, we're going through the application. The application is taking care of all that. We inherit all the application security and all the security in JD Edwards natively through the orchestrator. And most importantly, because we are simulating exactly what a user would do through the screen, we are getting the benefit of all of the event rules and business function and everything that gets fired off when we make changes in JD Edwards. So if I go and enter, let's say, an address book record, and at the end I go on and save it, all of the things that would happen for a user when I click that save button, they happen to us because we are clicking that save button as well. So what can we do with the orchestrator? When the orchestrator first came out, it was primarily used for Internet of Things, for IoT. In fact, it was called the IoT orchestrator. Over time, we've had new functionality that's come out, and that has allowed us to use it as more of an application integration tool and a business process automation tool. So things like building data connectors to external services, we're being able to run reports and move data around. These are all things that are now part of the orchestrator, so we no longer have to treat it as a sort of a dummy endpoint that's just sitting there receiving data. It can now go out and pull data from other sources. It can push data. It can even use JD Edwards as a source for itself, which is really what leads to sort of the business process automation functionality, right? If you think about it, business process automation is really almost like an application integration, just where we're integrating with ourselves, right? So we're using JD Edwards as the source and as a target, and we're automating some process based on what's happening in JD Edwards. So before I get into all of the latest changes, I want to just take you on a quick journey through the orchestrator. So as I mentioned, it started out as the IoT orchestrator, and the first release was in Tools 9155, okay? Now in this release of the orchestrator, there was no studio. All we had was XML files, so we'd open up Notepad, start typing in all of the rules and form requests that we wanted, and then we would copy it to the AIS server. We've come a long way since then. So in 9202, we got our first Orchestrator Studio, and it was quickly revised in Tools Release 9205. So starting in 9205, we got the Orchestrator Studio, or the basic framework of the Orchestrator Studio that we're using today. That same orchestrator has not really changed. We've added a lot of functionality and a lot of new components. So you can see on all of my other bullet points here, we have the addition of Groovy and data requests and batch jobs, FTP connectors, CSV support, all this other stuff. But the core framework around which we're building these orchestrations has really stayed the same until the newest release, 9.2.4, that came out last week. With this, we got a completely new user interface. Everything looks and feels totally different, but the concepts and what we were doing before are really the same, right? So we're still creating form requests, we're still creating connectors, we're still doing the same types of things, but the look and feel of it and how we use it is now totally different, and in my opinion, it's different for the better. Everything is a lot more modern and a lot easier to use now, and we're going to see that as we go through the rest of this presentation. So before I get into these changes, I want to talk about the Orchestrator beta program. So what happened was towards the end of August, right around in focus time, ACBM Solutions, was invited to participate in a beta program for the new Orchestrator. Now, it was us along with 3 other customers and 3 other partner companies that were identified and invited by Oracle to work on this. And this Orchestrator, the beta program, lasted about 2 months. So I mentioned it started at the beginning or at the end of August, and it lasted until right before the new tools release came out. The goals of this beta program were to identify high impact issues, so things that were potential showstoppers. We were also tasked with providing feedback on the new Orchestrator, both objective and subjective feedback. Lastly, we were able to give some input and provide recommendation for future enhancements. Now, being an Oracle partner and working with Oracle all the time on the Orchestrator, we do these kinds of things a lot, but it was really nice to be part of the beta program and have a more formalized structure around it. And the way that this worked logistically was at the outset, we defined a bunch of test cases. Specifically for ACBM Solutions, what we did was we used our Orchestrator training agenda as the basis for these test cases. And I'm looking through the attendee list, and fortunately, I see a lot of our Orchestrator trainer and alumni. So you're, of course, familiar with a lot of what we did and the paces that we put this new Orchestrator Studio through. So we did that, and that was the base for all of our testing. We did extend that, and we went on to some additional more complicated use cases that we've come across from our customers and our clients over time. But our starting point was our training agenda and recreating all of that in the new studio. We tracked our progress with continuous status reports, so identifying what tasks we were able to complete, any issues that we had, and anything that came up was very promptly remediated by Oracle. Either that or a workaround was provided. And finally, back to the structure of this, we had bi-weekly meetings that allowed us to update Oracle with what we were finding, and they updated us with changes that they were making, and it was a very interactive, iterative process throughout this beta program. So, without further ado, let's get into the top 10 changes. And these are in no particular order, although I would argue that I saved the best for last. But other than that, I just tried to kind of group them where I thought they made sense and where they kind of fed off of each other. So where applicable, I'm going to show you what it was like in the old studio and then the changes in the new studio. Wherever there was a brand new feature or enhancement that didn't have an old counterpart, then we just jump right into the new one. So the first one is component access. As you can see, in the old studio, we had our two master components on the left-hand side of the screen, and we had 4 subcomponents on the right-hand side of the screen, right? So the master components being the notifications and orchestrations, and the subcomponents being the service request, cross-reference, and whitelist and rules. Now, throughout the life of the Orchestrator, we got a whole bunch of other types of service requests. So when the Orchestrator first started, all we had was form requests. So form requests and service requests were pretty much synonymous. Now, we have the ability to write Groovy scripts, do data requests, send messages, connectors, incorporate watch list information into our orchestrations, and call UBEs and run batch applications from orchestrations. So all of these other things after form request, those are the things that have turned the Orchestrator into a truly enterprise class integration and process automation tool, right? I would argue that the Studio could rival and surpass any other ETL or RPA tool that exists out there. So this was a great start, but Oracle went ahead and made it better, right? Because the one thing here is that all of these new components that have made the Orchestrator so great, they're kind of buried underneath the service request. So what they did was everything is now top-level components. So I can access all of these things directly and individually. We still have our orchestration and notification master components on the left, and all of our subcomponents, meaning form requests, rules, cross-reference, whitelist are here, as well as the subcomponents, if you will, the things that were the other types of service requests. So they're all available right here at the top level. And at the bottom, we have the things that were previously on the tools page of the old Orchestrator Studio. So things like getting to the Orchestrator Client and the link to E1 or Orchestrator Monitor, a scheduler, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and the ability to import our orchestrations here. The second big change is the orchestration flow. For anyone who's written in orchestration, this screen is familiar, and while it has all the information we need, it is really busy, right? There's a lot of stuff going on here. We have all of our orchestration steps up here. We have our orchestration inputs over here. We have our map from each orchestration input to each step input over here. So there's a lot going on, and not to mention our ability to define output and associate schedules to it. So there's a lot happening in this one screen. If we look at the new studio, we get a much cleaner, much more graphical flow of what's happening in our orchestration, right? I have our steps in the beginning, and then when we have a rule, we see the branches of the true false, and we say, okay, this service request or this form request is only executed if this rule is true, and if it's false, we go on to the next step, and we could have more rules and true false rules embedded inside of each one of these, right? We could have as many layers deep as we want. But this graphical flow has made it a lot easier in terms of creating and managing these orchestrations here. And if you're wondering, well, this is great, it looks a lot simpler, but where's all the information that was on the other screen? If we click on the Start button here, we can define all of our orchestration inputs there. And at the end, if we click on this, we get all of the outputs over there. If I want to see my orchestration inputs, or I'm sorry, if we want to map those orchestration inputs to a step, we can click on the step and work on the mapping between the orchestration inputs and those step inputs, and they're kind of defined on the step where they belong. So much cleaner, much simpler and easier to understand interface. The next one, this is one of my favorite new enhancements, and there was no equivalent of this in the old studio, and it may seem like a small thing, but when you're developing hundreds or thousands of orchestrations, every little bit helps, and this is a really important one. So we now have the ability to create those components from directly within an orchestration. So prior to this, you would have to go in, create the component, and then leave it and go back out to the orchestration and then add that component to the orchestration. Now, you can, from within an orchestration, I never actually have to leave the orchestration screen. I can come in, I can create a new one, I can edit an existing component, I can do anything that I want right from this screen. So again, there's no old version of this because we couldn't do it before. All we could do is edit or remove. Now we have the ability to add, and that makes it a lot smoother and a lot easier to create these new ones. So the ability to reorder orchestration steps. In the old studio, we didn't have the ability to move things up or down or around. All we could do was delete, right? So if we wanted to insert a new step in an orchestration, we had to delete everything below where we wanted to insert it and then go and re-add everything back. And that was pretty inefficient. So instead what we have now is this concept of a design mode. So inside the orchestration, and by the way, these are two separate screenshots. The screen doesn't actually look like this. It's just one at a time. But on this screen, you can click on the design mode button and it toggles it to give you the little scissors to cut a step, the trash can to delete a step, or the plus sign to add a new step in there, okay? If you click on the cut, it will then change all of those icons to the little paste icon, and you can paste it anywhere you want in the process. So the ability to reorder these orchestration steps has now, now it exists. It's not even that it became easier, it's just now it exists, and it is, of course, easy as well. So much more flexible in terms of maintaining these orchestrations and changes to these orchestrations over time. Number 5, and this is similar to number 4, where number 4 we looked at reordering steps in an orchestration. Now I want to look at how do we reorder steps in a form request. So I have one up here, and we did have this ability before, right? We could click on these little arrows to move them up or down, but we had to do it one at a time, right? So I click on an arrow, and it would move it one row. Then I have to wait, click on the arrow, move it again, right? Wait for the screen to refresh each time. If you have a lot of forms and you have a lot of fields that you need to move around, this was very time consuming and tedious. Well, fortunately, we don't have to do that anymore. We have in the new Orchestrator Studio, when we look at the form request, I should say the first thing is that now the order of execution is side by side with the available actions. So you can see both of them much more easily, right, and scroll on them independently. But back to this point, the real nice thing is that if I want to move a step of the form request around, instead of having to click on each one individually, move it up and down, all I have to do is click on these little 3 lines on the left-hand side here. I click on that and I just drag and drop it to where I want. So with one click and drag and then drop, everything is reordered exactly the way I would like it to be. Number 6. So this is probably the biggest change in the new release. In the old version, or I should say the legacy version of the Orchestrator Studio, the studio was hosted on a separate ADF server. So we created and maintained our orchestrations on the ADF server, which required WebLogic in order to deploy that ADF server, and then the orchestrations were executed on the AIS server. So that is no longer the case. Now the ADF server goes away, and the Orchestrator Studio lives on the AIS server itself. So not only do you not need WebLogic anymore, for those of you, I mean, if you're using WebLogic, then certainly you would still have that for your AIS server, but if you're using WebSphere, you can deploy the Orchestrator Studio directly on your AIS server, and you no longer need that separate WebLogic instance. It is much easier to install, naturally, because you don't need as much infrastructure to support all of this. Once we have the AIS server up and running and a comparable tools release on the web server, then we're good to go. But probably the biggest and most impactful part of this is that now that everything is on the AIS server, it is so much more stable. We actually had a training class this week, and that it was on the old Orchestrator Studio, naturally, and that thing crashed probably 4 or 5 times on us while we were working. And that's pretty common for everyone that's used the Orchestrator Studio. You'll notice that sometimes you'll be working on it, and then all of a sudden you'll get a big error message, and it says ADF faces whatever, some nasty error message. That is no more. In the over 2 months I was working on this in the beta program, and even since the new GA version came out last week, I have not had a crash on me once. It is rock solid, completely stable, and probably the biggest benefit of this new studio. Furthermore, it sets the stage for all the future changes, right? Because now that we have everything on the AIS server, it'll be easier to deploy and manage new changes. So huge, huge victory, big win. I know the people that were on WebSphere that didn't want to go to the Orchestrator because of the WebLogic server, it's a big win for them. But for everybody else, just the stability issues alone is really huge. Okay, next one is the Orchestrator Client. So naturally, if we had our Orchestrator Studio on the ADF side, the Orchestrator Client was still running on the AIS server, right? So you had 2 different applications, 2 different URLs. The Orchestrator Studio was on ADF server, the Orchestrator Client was on the AIS server. You don't need that anymore. It's all on one, right? So the Orchestrator Client is still on the AIS server because now the Studio is on the AIS server. But more importantly, the Orchestrator Client is just part of the Studio. It's no longer a separate application. So when you go in to an orchestration and you go to run the application, you can come in here and open the client and run it directly from your orchestration. So just another way in which they're making things simpler and tied together a bit more. All right, grid support for form extensions. So for those of you that are not familiar with form extensions, starting with tools release 9233, we got the ability to call orchestrations from a J.D. Edwards application. So right on the glass, without any code or anything, I could add a form extension. I even put one up here in the screenshot of a button. All you do is you go and say add button, and then you click on a link and it says associate orchestration. Then from this button, you pick the orchestration that you want, and you can map the inputs from any of the fields on the screen. So we've had that from 9233, and then in 9234, we got the ability to map the results of the orchestration back to the other fields on the screen. So what's different now? Why am I talking about this? It's been around for a couple of releases now. Even though it's still fairly new, it's been around since before the new studio. But what's changed is that before we could only do this on the sort of header fields, right? We couldn't do it from a grid. Now with the new studio, we could map grid records to orchestration inputs and then take the outputs and map them back to grid records as well. Furthermore, we can iterate over those grid records. So if we need to do some sort of a mass update across an entire grid, we can build an orchestration, iterate over all those grid records, and have them get updated rather than having to go and sit in there and one by one manually update all of those things. So huge improvement and a lot of benefits from here. I should also mention, I talked about adding a button as a form extension. You can associate an orchestration with anything, including the save button or a close button. So if you have some process that you want to kick off some orchestration, whenever a user saves a record, you can absolutely go do that. It doesn't have to be a button. Number 9, the ability to export and import nested orchestrations. So in the past, when we created an orchestration that has a connector, one of those connector types, right? We have connectors for FTP servers, connectors for database servers, connectors for REST servers, and we also have connectors to call orchestrations. If we use a connector to call an orchestration and we try to export the sort of parent orchestration, it would not have exported all of the dependent connector orchestrations. Now with the new version, it does export all of those things as well. So it recursively goes through and brings in all of the orchestrations from the connectors and allows you to export those and then re-import them. So it's great for backups and for doing this, the migrating orchestrations if you need to do that. Number 10, the scheduler. The arch nemesis for most of the people on the call. Using the scheduler it's always been great, but it's always been very tedious, right? So it's easy to create a new orchestration. It's easy to create a scheduler. It's easy to associate that scheduler with an orchestration or a notification. It's been kind of technical and difficult to start and stop and view the scheduler. So in the past, you'd have to get some third-party REST client, make a REST service call to the AIS server and get a token. Then you take that token and copy and paste it into another REST call to start a scheduler. It's just a lot of back and forth and much more technical than it needed to be. With the new Orchestrator Studio, we now have a nice, beautiful user interface for starting, stopping, and even monitoring orchestrations. So now, starting and stopping schedulers of orchestrations and notifications for that matter. So if you come into that new scheduler UI, all you have to do is click the toggle button. The second you click it, it kicks off the scheduler and everything's running. You no longer need to do all those other steps of requesting tokens and moving things along. You literally click a button and the scheduler is started and you're good to go. So this to me is the biggest new feature of the studio. I mean, certainly the most impactful is getting rid of the ADF server and putting everything on AIS. But in terms of from a user perspective and the functionality that we now get, this is by far the most important. So let's just do a quick recap of the 10 Orchestrator changes. So the first one is the component access. Now all the components are up at the top level, right? We no longer need to go into the different service requests and have different types of service requests. Everything is right at the top for us. Next is the flow of the orchestration. So now we have the graphical flow and we can see how all the components interact with each other and how data is passed to each other. The third one is that we can create the components in the orchestration directly, right? We no longer need to go out of the orchestration, go into the component, create it, then go back out and go into the orchestration and add again. Everything is done right there in the orchestration. 4 and 5 kind of go together. Right now we have the ability to reorder orchestration steps that we did not have before, but now we can cut and paste an orchestration step anywhere we want. The fifth one is reordering the form request steps. So we were able to do that before, but remember, we had to click on those little icons and move them one row at a time. Now we can just drag and drop wherever we want, so it's much faster. Number 6 is the Orchestrator Studio server, right? So this is what we were talking about, that there's no longer an ADF server required for this. We don't need web logic, and it's just a lot more stable because everything's on the AIS server. Next one is the Orchestrator Client. So with the Orchestrator Client, it's no longer a separate application, separate URL. Everything's tied together inside the Orchestrator Studio, right? So I can build my orchestrations and then just test them right there from the client inside the Orchestrator Studio. Number 8 was the grid support for form extensions. So this gave us the ability to map inputs from a grid to an orchestration and map outputs from a grid to the orchestration and iteratively call an orchestration for each row in the grid, right? So super useful in terms of maintaining grid data. Number 9 was exporting and importing nested orchestration. So if we have a connector that's calling another local orchestration, we can now, when we do an export, it gives us all of the dependent orchestrations that were part of the parent level orchestration. And number 10, my favorite, and I think the biggest new feature from a user perspective, is the new scheduler UI that allows us to start and stop the scheduler and see everything that's running without any REST commands or calling tokens or anything like that. So with that, I'm going to go into a quick demo of the Orchestrator. Okay. Let me bring up my Orchestrator Studio. I'm going to log in. And here's our new Orchestrator Studio. I'm going to click on Orchestrations. We'll go over to New. And we'll give it a name. So I'm going to call this ACBM RCH Add AB Webinar. Okay, and we're going to say add a new address book record. We're going to create this orchestration from scratch and we're going to test it right here in the studio. So I'll save this so we have our top level there. Now we have our design mode, so I'm going to click on that and I'll click our plus sign and I want to add a new form request. Now certainly I have all the form requests that have already been created, but like I said before, we can create these brand new inside the orchestration itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click on New, and let's get a new form request. So I'll call this ACBM FREQ. We'll call this Add AB Webinar. And the description will be the same, add a new address book record. So now, the first thing we're going to do is go to the Work with Addresses screen. So that application is the P01012. The form is the B form for Work with Addresses, and the version is GJDE0001, right? I'll click Save and Load, and then all we want to do on this screen is click the Add button, right? We want to add a new address book record, so I'm going to go over, click on Add, and here it is right here. Now, I want to add another form, the one to do the address book revisions. So I'm going to click on After. I'm going to select the P01012 again. This time we're going to select the A form for the address book revisions. And we're going to select that same version, the ZJD version. This time I'm going to click on Bypass Form Processing so that we can get some additional return fields when we do this. So looking here, maybe I want to bring in my 4 address lines. So address line 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'll put in our alpha name. We're going to get the city, state, and zip. So here's our city. Our postal code is right here, and our state. And we also do need a search type, right? So let's go ahead and bring that search type in. So here's all the fields that I want to be able to enter, but I also want the previously assigned number. So I want to return this field, so I'm just going to click on this to return it. And maybe I also want the alpha name to be returned, so we'll echo the alpha name as part of this. So there we go. Everything is created here. Now, maybe I want to rearrange the order of this, right? So maybe I want the alpha name first, so I'm just going to drag it up here now. Again, I don't need to click those arrows to go up and down. Search type. I want to put that after the alpha name. Now here's all of our 4 address lines. City is good, and then maybe I just want to change state and zip code. Now everything is drag and drop. So as I'm scrolling through, I just pick off all the fields that I want, make sure that they're all there, and then it's super easy to rearrange them. I know in the past, what I used to do is search for things over in the available actions in the order that I wanted to add them. No longer, and I really did that because it was so tedious to try to reorder them later on. Now there's no need. It's so easy to move them around. I just scroll through the list, and anything that I want, I just pick it up. And we specified our return data, so we'll take a look. We have our previously assigned number and our alpha name. They all look good. So this is really complete. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Save it successful. I'll close it. Our form request was already automatically added right back into our orchestration. So now I need to define our orchestration inputs, right? So if I come into the form request, I have this add inputs to orchestration. So if I click on that add inputs to orchestration, they're all added there. And if I click on auto map, they're mapped back so that the orchestration inputs now match to all the inputs of the service request. And sure enough, if I come over to the start and I click on inputs and values, we see all of our inputs have been added here. Now, furthermore, when I'm creating an address book record, the alpha name and search type is required. So let's go ahead and require those fields. Okay. So there, the inputs are defined. My orchestration is defined. Let's go ahead and define the outputs. So I have 2 outputs, previously assigned number and the alpha name. So I'll toggle those there so that they get returned, and I'll save it. And our orchestration is done. So just like that, we have a simple orchestration that can that can add a new address book record. So if I want to run it, I said before, the client is part of the studio. Doesn't get any easier than this. I just click on start, and if I click on this little run button, it brings up the Orchestrator Client. Here's all of our pieces. So I'm going to call this ACBM webinar test address. Search type can be a C. I'll enter in 123 ABC Way as the address line 1. Do New York, and I'll do postal code 10001. And if I did everything right, if I click on run, it looks like my previously assigned number did not get returned for me correctly, but I should add the version here, although I could have just hard-coded that before, which is probably what I should do. So that's it. It doesn't look like it's returning the previously assigned number, but that's all that's required in order to run this. So that orchestration is done and tested. So that's how we can run them here. I want to show you guys one other way of running orchestrations, and that's with an Excel add-in that we've created. So if I come in here and I refresh the cache, and let me refresh my orchestrations, we'll see I get all of the orchestrations that are either created by me, so my personal orchestrations, or the ones that are shared with me, including the one that we just created, this add AB webinar, right? Now, I did have a little bit of an issue with it in terms of returning that address book number, so I'm going to go ahead and select another add address book orchestration that I had running before. So I'm going to select that orchestration, click on Create Template, and it paints this nice template for me to go ahead and start entering a bunch of data into JD Edwards. So let's say, with the Orchestrator Client, I could enter 1 record. With this Excel add-in, I could enter thousands, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say ACBM webinar Excel test. I'll say test customer. Let's go ahead and create a few of these, right? So let's do a test vendor. We'll do a test error. And let's do a test employee as well, so we see a bunch of different search types going in. So the search types for this, I'm going to do a C for the customer, V for vendor. I'm going to do a search type of Z for the error one so that we can see what the errors look like in here, and then an E for employee. For the address line, I'm going to call this 123 ABC Way again. Do an attention of AP. I'll do New York, and we'll do New York, and the postal code is 10001. Okay, let me copy these down. And now that that's all filled out, I can simply click on this Upload Data button, confirm that I want to do it. It goes out, it's actually going to request a token, so it takes a second for the overhead. Once the token's requested, it flies through everything, and it returns back our output field. So I have an output of the alpha name and the JD address number that was created by the orchestration, along with the status code and the date and time it was updated. We also, for the error, we see that an error occurred, and if I click on this field, you'll see that the comment comes up and it tells us exactly the same error message that we would get from the orchestrator, which is the same one that we would get from the screen, indicating that, that we have an issue where Z is not found in the user-defined code 01ST. So you don't need to go and search in the work center or anything else like that and try to hunt down errors. Everything's brought back to you right here. And I just want to say, we are very proud of this Excel add-in. We think it's, we know it's already saving hundreds and thousands of hours for a lot of our clients. But the thing that I really like about this is that it gives end users the ability to start interacting with orchestrations, right? So if you think about what the purpose of the orchestrator is, it's to give business analysts the ability to do things that previously required a developer resource, which is fantastic, right? And great from an integration and a self-contained process automation. But one of the questions that we got all the time was, how do we have users call these orchestrations? And certainly form extensions is a great way, but you're still sort of limited to one at a time. And so that's why we built this Excel add-in so that users can start interacting with the orchestrations that our business analysts are creating, and we can start dealing with larger volumes of data and getting that into the orchestrator, okay? So with that, it looks like we're coming just about up to time, and I think, Kathy, what I will do is turn it back over to you, and you can take us through some of these questions.
Thanks, Larry. So as I said before, you can submit questions in a panel like the one displayed on the right side of the screen right now, and click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we have a few questions we can get started with here as people are entering their questions. We just upgraded to 9.2.3.4. Do we have to upgrade again to get the new orchestrator?
Yeah, so the new Orchestrator Studio is associated with the 9.2.4 tools release. So you would have to upgrade to that newest tools release in order to get the new Orchestrator Studio. It goes hand in hand with the AIS server and the whole tools release. I've had people ask about the web maintenance packs. So you could try to use a web maintenance pack, but that's not really officially supported for, the web maintenance packs are really for if you want to do an incremental update. So say you were going from 9.2.3.1 to 9.2.3.5, something like that, you could use a web maintenance pack for. But in the case of this, since we're going to 9.2.4 as a sort of a base version, you would have to do the complete tools upgrade for that. So good question.
Okay. Does the orchestrator support XML?
Yes, and it has for a little while now. So in the original days of the orchestrator, we only supported JSON, or I should say Oracle supported JSON, but due to a lot of customer demands, XML is now supported as input and output as well from the Orchestrator Client.
Great. Does the new orchestrator support SOAP?
No, it does not. So the orchestrator, or AIS, is based on REST services. So everything that comes in and out of the orchestrator should be REST-based. Yeah, SOAP, if you need to use SOAP, then we'd still recommend looking at business functions, but most modern applications do support REST. So for those, I would definitely recommend using the orchestrator. It's definitely the easier and better way to go.
Okay. And a question about the JD Accelerator. Does the Excel add-in work with older versions of the orchestrator?
Yes, it does. I actually created that Excel add-in about 2 years ago. So it does work with all versions of the Orchestrator, starting with 9.202. So as soon as the discovery service became available, that's when it started working. So really, if you're on any tools, if you're on any 9.2 tools release, it will work with that.
Okay. With the new scheduler UI, do you still need to configure scheduler resiliency behind the scenes, or is it already resilient by default?
That is a good question. I know that there were some questions about the scheduler resiliency and having that work before. I know that the scheduler resiliency, it definitely does work now, and it's good. I am not a CNC technical person, so I think you do still need to configure it, but let me double check on that, and I will get back to you. I think you still need to configure it separately, but I'll double check and get back to you. I see who sent that.
Okay, great. Can we add more fields to the Excel worksheet easily, i.e. cat codes, etc.?
Okay, so that's for the Excel add-in, I think. So the Excel add-in, what it does is it reads the inputs that are expected from the orchestration. So actually, if I went into that orchestration, that add address book orchestration, and I see who sent this too, so I can follow up with you separately about this and give you a more in-depth demo. But basically, whenever I add a new field to the orchestration as an orchestration input, it'll dynamically show up in the Excel add-in. So we're actually reading that discovery service and picking all of the inputs as they're defined in the orchestration and all the outputs as they're defined in the orchestration, and painting the template based on the definition of the orchestration. And if the orchestration definition changes, the template will automatically get updated to reflect that.
Okay. Noticed you are doing the form request manually. Is the process recorder still available with this?
Yes, the process recorder is still available with this, and I thought about demoing the process recorder, but since the topic of this webinar was really focused on the changes in the new studio, I wanted to spend as much time as possible in the studio to kind of show you how that works. But yes, the process recorder absolutely is still there, works, it's great, we love it, use it, all that kind of stuff. So definitely still there and supported.
Okay. Have you worked with tools 9.2.4.1 yet?
No, it has not been released yet, so I don't believe anyone has worked with it yet. Now, normally, so 9.2.4 came out last Wednesday, and the beta program went through the Monday or Tuesday before that, right? So I've been working with that release candidate prior to 9.2.4. Typically, the 9.2.4.1, I mean, unless 9.2.4.1 came out today, maybe I missed it, but 9.2.4.1, usually the one version comes out within a couple weeks after the base version. So I'm anxious to get that. I think there's going to be some good things in there as well. Hopefully some things that we suggested as part of the beta program. And as soon as it comes out, I'll definitely be getting it. In fact, I'm going to go check after this now since someone brought that up.
Okay. Do you still utilize the record? Do you still utilize the record, the process to create an orchestrator?
Yeah, so that's a duplicate question from someone else. So yes, you can still use the process recorder to record a process. That still works. Yep, same answer.
Thank you. Okay. Is the JD Accelerator Excel add-in a product specific to ACBM Solutions?
Yes, it is. So we developed the JD Accelerator add-in. That is ours. And if you are interested, I guess here's the little sales pitch, right? If you're interested, we're doing sort of a relaunch right now. Anyone who wants a free trial through the end of the year, you can email me at the end of this. In fact, let me just scroll to the next slide. If anyone's interested in that Excel add-in, just shoot me an email, and I'll give you a free copy to evaluate through the end of the year. And then since you attended this webinar, we'll give you a discount for next year as well.
Okay. How many records can Grid receive as feedback? Any limit, performance issues?
That's a good question. So I haven't dug into that aspect of it yet. Part of the majority of the beta program was spent focused on the studio. So I did play around with the form extensions a little bit, but I haven't done extensive testing around, you know, a lot of rows and all that kind of stuff. So as much as I'd like to give you an answer, I just haven't spent enough time with it. But to my knowledge, there's not a limit. Of course, the more rows, the longer it'll take. But the Orchestrator is pretty quick, especially for one-off type records. So I imagine that there wouldn't be too much of a performance issue. But again, I haven't really done a lot of stress testing with that.
A question about the webinar itself. Has it been recorded and will it be emailed to us, including the demo?
Yeah, I will. It's being recorded by default, and I can send out an email. You'll probably have to just do the registration thing again in order to view the recording, but we'll send that out to all attendees and give you the ability to watch this recording again or share it with other people if you like.
Great. Do you think in the future release the notification will be separate of the Orchestrator?
That's a good question. I don't think so. They built the notifications in the Orchestrator Studio, and my guess is it will probably stay there. But to be honest, I mean, I don't have any inside knowledge of that, right? So I guess Oracle could come out with a separate notification studio if they wanted to, but I don't see that happening. I would consider that to be unlikely, although anything is possible.
Is an Excel option presented usable for the update of existing data as well?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, in the Excel demo portion of this, I showed just adding an address book record, right? But if you think about what it's doing, it's really just calling an orchestration from Excel. So whatever that orchestration does, that's what's going to happen. So if I have an update address book orchestration, and again, I see who this is as well, I can follow up with you separately. Whatever the orchestration does, that's what we're going to do as well. We're just calling the orchestration from Excel and passing the data as input. So it's, think of it as like an Orchestrator client, but for a lot of records at one time.
Okay. Can we call BSFNs from Orchestrator in new tool release?
Another good question. This is one that's been, I think, requested a lot, and you cannot call business functions from the Orchestrator. I mean, I can't make any promises or comment what Oracle is or is not working on, but I suspect hopefully at some point we'll get that ability. I think we will, but yeah, I don't, it's not there yet, and all I can do is say is I hope we get that.
How can we have more info on the JD Accelerator?
Just send me an email. Send me an email. I'll get you an evaluation copy and a private demo, and that's fine. The installation of that thing, we just send you an installer. It literally takes 2 minutes. You double click it, you install it, you enter your license key, and you're off and running. It automatically pulls in all of the orchestrations for your user from your AIS server. So super straightforward. Just send me an email, I'll get it to you.
Okay. Is it possible to send the status in an orchestration like you have in your Excel extension? I used to receive response error 504 and no details.
So it depends on what the error message is, right? So the error messages that we're displaying are just what's coming back from the Orchestrator. We're not doing any real magic in there. So if you're getting a 504 error and there's no details, then that's sort of the same thing. The only thing I could say is that starting with Tools Release 923, you could start specifying your own user-defined error messages. So I would look into that. I mean, certainly still here in 924 as well to create your own error messages, but it wouldn't be by status code. It would just be for that step in the orchestration.
Okay. Are there any improvements on Orchestrator timeout issues?
Well, the timeout is set by you, so it's configurable for your company, right? You set the timeout on your AIS server and Server Manager. So if it times out, it'll still time out, but you can configure that for your for your environment.
Where can we get the Excel add-in again?
This is awesome. I'm glad everybody's excited about the Excel add-in. So yeah, I think I've already answered it, but just in case, feel free to send me an email. I'll get you a copy of that Excel add-in.
Great. Do you have any hands-on training or on-site training at our facilities if we request it?
Absolutely. That's one of our main lines of business is the training. It's been incredibly popular. We have public orchestrator trainings that we offer roughly every other month, and private ones we do on demand, either virtually or at your company. We do it all the time. We have a lot of our orchestrator training alumni that have attended this, so definitely happy to provide that for you. Just send me an email. I'll get all the information to you.
Okay, and last question here. Grid support in form extension means we can get feedback for array list from orchestration, or we have to process grid data one by one?
It's a good question. It depends on how you create the orchestration. So the orchestration, even before arrays, it always still kind of handled grid data. I mean, and that's why even in that Excel add-in that I showed, we're able to process header detail stuff. So like things like creating a journal entry, right? We can do that through the Excel add-in, and that's been around really forever. It's just a matter of how you send the data to the orchestrator. So in the case of the form extensions, I think it depends on how you create the orchestration and whether you're using arrays or not.
Okay. Currently, it is necessary to make sure to clear cache when using client for changes. Is that still needed or available in this? Yes,
it is still needed, and there is a clear cache button. And in the Excel add-in, we have a clear cache button as well. So if you do make changes to the orchestration, you still need to clear cache. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You still need to just clear the cache whenever there's changes to an orchestration, and you can do it inside the Orchestrator Studio. You could do it directly by sending a REST request. You could do it within our Excel add-in. There's a bunch of ways to do it.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like that's our last question, and want to extend a note of thanks to you, Larry, for the presentation. Great job. And thanks to all of you for your time and your attention today. If we didn't get to any questions you think about after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to Larry directly. His contact information is on the screen right now, lfiorino@acbmsolutions.com, or you can call him at 908-464-5402. If you are interested in learning about any of the ACBM Solutions products and services discussed today, or the JD Accelerator itself, sounded like we had a lot of interest in that. Again, please feel free to contact Larry at the email address or at the phone number displayed right now. Anyway, have a great rest of your day, and thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.